So, Leo, we've had a chat already and we've conversed on LinkedIn a lot, and we've just had a 10-minute chat off air. So, you're running a fairly new enterprise called Edsplorer, and you've been an education consultant for some time. And your key three areas are helping schools to, or helping anyone learning how to learn. Student leadership is a big focus, and also helping schools with the whole global citizenship piece, correct? And just for everyone's look, this is a conversation where we're going to be asking each other some questions, and we don't have a specific direction. So it's a chat, all right? Tell us about the learning, how to learn, what that looks like in a school. Is that something that you get the teachers to do a better job of for themselves? Obviously works with kids. Like, what does that look like? But specifically, what does it look like when Edsplorer works with a school to make the learning how to learn a more powerful thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that's a question with several layers there. I think
Yes, I'm
there's
sorry about
a
that.
few questions. I think, first of all, anyone would need to know what learning to learn is,
Yeah, yeah,
because it's a buzzword and it's one of those sort of amorphous sets of
yeah.
concepts. And I think if we flipped learning to learn into a question, and the question was, what mindsets and skills would children need to have to be really effective and efficient learners so that they can then be confident and learn on their own terms, independently of adults.
Right.
And that's an important variable I've added on at the end because obviously in the mainstream education system, we work with pedagogues.
Mhm.
As you go into university, it's still pedagogues, but there's a lot more sort of, independence required. But often in school systems, we're quite spoon-fed. And therefore, learning to learn is the space that children can control or learn to control to gives them this greater independence. Where a teacher comes into that is as a facilitator of a set of skills. So to be more concrete, what are those skills? So the ability, the motivation, I think, even to learn independently with curiosity, to develop certain habits of mind, ways of thinking about learning is having a compound effect, building habits of mind around resilience and sort of a growth mindset, how to absorb failures and setbacks, to have a sense of like strategic effort. We call it smart effort. There's a whole array of areas. Now, this is all underpinned by the learning sciences. So, it's not just Leo making this up. This is
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, top scientists over the years who've done lots of studies about how we learn best. And the idea is to bring that into the education system in a way which is not currently taught in most, unless you've got these pockets of excellence, where it is in a curriculum or somebody is teaching children some of these cognitive skills, say metacognition or higher order thinking.
Can you put a little semicolon on where you're at so you don't lose your thread? But
Yeah,
you mentioned how people learn best, right?
yeah.
And I know there's science to this, but I reckon, and you're not going to be surprised hearing me say this, but I reckon this is common sense once you really unpack it as well, right?
Yeah,
Let's just have a quick little chat about how people learn best, but let's start with how people don't learn best. So give me a
yeah.
model about how kids don't learn best, because I think that's a
Right.
good place to start, because we can get very academic and you can throw all these things out and teachers can talk about it. But if you start with what doesn't work, it's kind
Yeah,
of like, oh, I
yeah.
might have to change here because I do a lot of that without knowing it, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's a great way of exposing the truth when you flip something on
Yeah.
its head.
Shining a light on the elephant.
Yeah. Well, first of all, learning is a social, emotional, relational thing for the most part in a school context. It's not always social and it's not always relational, but we don't learn best in a school environment where we're sitting in a culture of fear, tension, and anxiety. So, I mean, I'd say a safe classroom where children can ask questions and explore and be curious is really important. Children don't learn best when learning is very isolated, where it's isolated knowledge that feels irrelevant to the child
Right.
and is not connected to their prior learning in any way, is not perceived as useful,
So
is not perceived as
compartmentalized
interesting.
instruction is not the way to go. And I'm thinking
Yeah.
through a mathematics lens there because still a lot of mathematics is taught, right? Here's this part, and now here's this part, and here's this part, and here's this part, and not realizing that that actually makes it very difficult for students to learn. But it's not just
I think
mathematics. It's
without, if I can allow me just a tiny little bit of neuroscience and explanation to
yeah,
say why that is true. First of all, and you may be familiar with what's called schema theory.
no,
So
doing a lot of
schemas are mental frameworks or representations of knowledge which are interrelated and interconnected.
uh-huh.
So if you're a domain expert in an area, so if you're maths knowledge, I know your background is in maths, Richard. So you've got this domain level of understanding
No.
where you've developed these frameworks of ideas and concepts and
Yeah,
principles, how to do things,
yeah,
procedures and strategies, which are
that makes
interrelated and
sense.
developed over time. Yeah.
Yep.
So these are mental schematics. Now we use those for problem solving. We use them for transfer in real world situations.
Hmm.
And we develop these schemas over time through education, but also through experience and feedback
Hmm.
from just living.
Mm.
And we correct these models till we become more and more accurate and they become more and more reliable. If you are in a school system where the information is compartmentalized, where if it's just like a textbook with a bunch of chapters
Yeah,
and content that you've got to follow, the challenge for a child is to bridge the gap between where they're at and their current schema and its development,
yeah,
and to bridge that. Now, if there is no natural connection or flow through where they're extending knowledge from that concept or that concept, then the knowledge is seen to be isolated. And this is extremely difficult for the brain to absorb and accommodate that. So,
and
in a
so
sense,
can I just slot
if,
in? Sorry. So
yes, you can.
again,
Yeah,
the idea of having kids relational and conversational and being able to discuss this stuff really helps them to make those connections. Yes. So that's the
absolutely.
science behind
Yeah,
that part.
absolutely. And you put it in very simple terms, encouraging the
I'm a simple
children
guy.
to discuss it. Well, we need simplicity, Michael Fullan, right? This is a
Ah,
complex
simplicity. I
arena.
like. Can I adopt that?
Yeah, but it's Michael Fullan, so it's a nod to him. There's so many variables at play here, but the concept that you just described is called the Feynman Technique from famous physicist, I think it was Richard Feynman. And what he was doing with his students is saying, right, just go and describe that topic and explain it to each other and give
Yeah.
some personal examples.
Yes.
And just that alone means that they're going into their memory system, retrieving the knowledge, interpreting it, manipulating it into a context that they can understand by giving real world examples, meaning that they are forcing themselves to understand it.
Right.
And that is
Cool.
deep learning.
So you have just given right there a fantastic gold nugget for someone who's listening to this thinking, well, this all sounds great in theory, but so how does this work? And then you've just said you can get the kid like you that they're doing maybe some compartmentalized learning. You've taught them one, two, three. Okay, and that's an activity, a 10-minute activity. Ask the kids to discuss, to explain it to each other how it works. Have a real natter, and then we're going to bring it back to the whole class and see where everyone's at, right? So that's a
Absolutely.
tangible thing, an
Yeah.
activity that anybody can do many times during a unit of work.
Extremely powerful. And I think a nice bite-sized way of saying it is say it, teach it is a little term that's sometimes used. And we can say to the kids, we're going to do say it, teach it now.
Say it,
Work with a
teach it.
peer, say it, teach it. Another one I've heard is called in other words. And that's a really nice prompt. So you
I.e. for
say,
sure.
yeah, i.e., what put it in your words, in other words, what would you call it? And,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that is just a great way because they're introducing
yeah.
it through their
Relevance.
language
Yes.
framework, which is tied to their conceptual framework.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, can you remember where you were at in this discussion? Can you go back there?
Well, for using the replay, I think again. So I was talking about schemas, but before that, really, I was sort of breaking down what learning to learn is into its different components and different
So,
contexts.
okay. Can I throw you something? Because I was asking you to, let's start with what doesn't work.
Yeah.
And this could be a little controversial, but what I always do is go back to how I started teaching. And how I started teaching was the way I was taught for 12 years, pretty much universally. And never mind, it worked for me. I got through, but it's stand and deliver. So, and I'm not criticizing any teachers, and I'm not even necessarily criticizing the approach. It's just that I don't know if you could call it physics, but it just doesn't work in this. If we're trying to find the most efficient way to learn for our students to learn, me standing at the front and standing and delivering and talking at them and getting them to shut up and listen to me and now repeat and give them examples to do whatever subject it is. And so as they are sitting there thinking, now, what did Mr. Andrews say? Oh, Mr. Andrews said I had to do this, right? I'm going to do that. Now, what did he say next, right? So that's the learning. It's what did Mr. Andrews say? That I think is an inefficient way if we are aiming to maximize this learning to learn concept. Am I correct?
Yeah. You need some of that. You do need some of that, what we call direct teaching and
Yes.
explanation. But
Yeah.
you rest of the time, what you want your students to be doing, and this is coming from the cognitive sciences, is
Yeah.
and it is common sense really because we can apply it to ourselves. But it's really you want them to be active learners, which means
Yeah.
actively thinking and manipulating the information, then processing it into through their system, through their working memory,
Right.
and
And
introducing it into their long-term memory. So the more time they've got to be doing that through inquiry,
yes.
driven processes, which are built on their own inherent curiosity,
Yeah.
more likely they are to retain it because it's
Right.
interesting and it arouses their curiosity. And curiosity is one of the cornerstones of active learning.
So now if anyone has listened to a number of my chats, they'll go, oh, here he goes again. He's going to say this again. And I'm going to keep saying this until I die, unless the whole world gets it right. But what really annoys me with the purists who advocate explicit instruction, direct instruction, whatever it is, because yes, absolutely. If I'm going to give you an instruction, why not make it explicit? Why not make it as efficient as possible rather than waffling on that you in a way that you don't understand? It's got to be explicit. Like that's just basic, instruction 101. But what they don't do is reference their thing that they're putting across in terms of teacher centricity or student centricity. And my firm belief is that we need to ultimately give students ownership or a level of ownership over what they're doing. So there needs to be a level of choice. They need to, and the ability to converse, still guided by the teacher, still structured, highly structured, but it's not stand and deliver anymore, right? So I am
Yeah.
now a facilitator of learning. I'm in the circus of my classroom and I'm one of the gang, but I'm playing a very different role. I'm playing a facilitator role now, not a stand and deliver teacher. The whole thing is student centric. But guess what? There's a lot of maybe direct explicit instruction or explicit instruction. I don't care what you call it, but there's instructions that are explicit, but they tend to be when the students want it. Hey, we're stuck. Can you work it out yourselves? Like, is there anyone else? I'm your last port of call. Okay, right. These guys need this bit of instruction. Who else needs this? You seven, eyes on me. The rest of you can choose to listen or not, but just be quiet for a sec. And I'm now giving that explicit instruction, but it's way more efficient than it used to be when I was doing that as a whole class lecture, because when I'm doing the whole class lecture, 3/4 of the kids aren't ready for it, or they're just bored. So it's a completely different framework, but the basis is student centric. And it's still a big argument. Oh, no, it doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work if it's not done well. We're not talking about just throwing it out to the kids, make whatever you can out of it. It's got to be taught really well. And it's a lot harder to be a quality facilitator of learning, I think, than it is to be a quality stand and deliver. Because stand and deliver is much simpler. There's much less moving parts. Being a facilitator of learning, like what you're saying, is much more complex. But it's way, way, way more fun. And you get to know much more about your kids. And it's just so addictive. right?
Yeah.
So that's my rant over, but I do get annoyed because I hear about how important explicit instructions. Yes, it is, but they're not talking about it through that lens, right? And so I'm saying it's the best of both worlds. It's a highly structured, student-centric model with a lot of explicit instruction in there, almost like just-in-time teaching, like when the kids need it,
Mm.
and a
Mm.
lot of collaboration and your little things. What did it say it, teach it, in other words, all those sort of things, and a whole lot
Yeah.
more. But I just wanted to, because I think a lot of people think if I'm talking about explicit instruction, oh, that's stand and deliver. Well, it might be stand and deliver for 30 seconds or 5 minutes,
Mm.
but it's not an approach that I'm using 80% of the time in my classroom anymore.
Yeah. I agree. I think learning is best when it's a structured environment.
It's got to be structured.
There are some guidelines, principles,
Absolutely.
learning objectives, whatever they are, they need to be clear. And you can use dual coding for that. You can write things down and you can say them. And at the end of the day, you're managing the cognitive load of children. And there could be huge variance in the classroom
Yeah.
of children are at. I've just seen a study from a professor, which is amazing, but in just a general range in a classroom in any given area, there could be as much as 6 years in terms of distribution of ability in a
Wow.
particular subject. So it doesn't make sense to teach to the middle and the center of the bell curve. It makes so much more sense to have a supportive, needs-based approach, but it is hard. I want to have empathy for educators. When you first start teaching, I don't know how you felt, Richard, but when I first started teaching, I was scared.
Yeah,
I was scared. I had like 30, 35
mate, I was waking
kids
up at
in the
2
classroom.
a.m. Oh my God, I've got the name I won't mention tomorrow, lesson two.
Yeah.
Waking up at 2 a.m., sweating. Look, if anyone's listening to this who is waking up at 2 a.m. freaking out about their class the next day, because I think a lot more of that goes on. I mean, I think it's a good anecdote. I had to talk to myself once because I was literally really, I was just so worried about certain classes. And then I thought, you know what? Okay, what's the worst thing that could happen? And it was like, okay, a kid standing up and just yelling at me to get effed, right? Okay, so that happens. Oh, well, I'll do this without yelling and carrying. Okay, oh, that's all right. What's another thing? Oh, okay, oh, well, I'll do that. And I worked out all these scenarios for all these things I was worried about. And it's like, okay, I'm okay now because now I'm armed.
Mm.
And it made such a difference. And so there's a little
Mm.
tip for anyone who's
That's a good one. And so what do we do? Our default, if you're trying to manage 35, children and the threats, the potential, because, there could be traumatized kids or children who are disaffected, and you try and take a more centralized volume, control-based approach where you might have, set up your room, where you've got the children in small units so
yeah.
you can minimize the risk of disruption. And so it almost plays to a traditional model and classroom setup. As we become more confident and more masterful at developing relationships with children and knowing what engages them, we should be able to relax that and then set up classrooms in a way which are different. And like I tell you, you may have seen this yourself. Often I've gone into with my previous role with Council of International Schools. I've gone into many schools and observed learning, like learning walks, not as
Yeah.
an inspector, not to catch teachers out or anything like that, but see patterns. Often in the early years in primary schools, I see really active sort of project, sort of discovery type learning, which is in very structured environment, very purposeful, but where the children are agents in that learning. So they're like co-creators of that learning, and they've got voice and they've got choice, and they're set up in stations. And those stations might often be doing different things, or they might be rotating. And the teachers thought about those groups, but the children are really, really engaged in that style of learning and solving problems together, inquiring,
And
and then the teacher
and
plays that
sorry,
role.
can I say that the reason they're engaged is because they're outside of this framework of, oh, I have to remember what Mr. Andrews said to do, right? The reason they're engaged is choice.
Hmm.
And it's so obvious to you Is that so obvious to you? It's obvious to me now. It wasn't back in the early days. And I think a lot of teachers don't realize, but we spend all these courses on how to engage students. Well, number one, like, why aren't they engaged? Well, they've got no choice. They've got no agency.
Yep.
So
Dan Pink, Dan Pink's work, Autonomy, Mastery, and Purpose.
yeah, but it's
Yeah,
so
it's
powerful.
for
It
all
can.
humans, all humans.
I've suggested activities that teachers can follow, and they do it, and they come back. Richard, that was my year 9 class last lesson Friday. I've never seen them so engaged. Like, it was a shock, not a shock to me, because this activity gave them some choice and some agency over what they're doing, and it is intrinsically engaging. And I think,
That's so much better than what often you see, and I have seen in back in the day, where a teacher just throws on a video and kind
oh,
of like, tries to bribe the children almost, say, look, if you're good and you don't mess around, we can watch a video on Friday afternoon, as opposed to the one who gives them choice of some brilliant projects or
yeah,
things where they can involve themselves. Yeah.
it like I get passionate with this because I truly believe there's teachers out there who don't understand that concept from a revelationary point of view, because it is a revelation that you get and you go, oh my gosh, why didn't I know this 10 years ago? Like,
Yeah.
far out. And then there's a spark that can take you in 100 different directions. It doesn't mean that you are letting go of your control. In fact, you do this well and you have way more control over the learning, way more control over the behavior in the class. It's counterintuitive.
It
Anyway.
is. That's a brilliant point. And there's one thing I just want to add to that.
Hmm.
Relationships, relationships, relationships,
Yeah.
relationships is it. I know a lot of people would talk about it, but is the most important area for me with children in education. If they feel that you're backing them and that you support them, that you believe in them, and you're going to give them some agency and a bit of voice, some warm demanding, I call it, so there is some accountability. So look, we've got to get through this together, but I support you. Then that's where the magic happens. But it's not, as you say, this is the common sense, because that's probably how most of us prefer to be worked with as well, is as professionals. And I think those things are not dissimilar, right?
So here's the thing, right? This is my common sense approach, right? If we want to, and look, I may be wrong here. There may be some science that says this is not quite correct, but this is what I think. If you want to see how learning works in school age, either look at how we like to learn as adults, what fires us up. Like, if I'm doing a DIY project, I'm big on that I haven't done before, what do? I don't enroll in a course and sit there and be lectured at. I jump on YouTube. It's my choice. And I can choose where I go, and I choose my research, and I choose how I put it together. It's 100% self-directed. Or look how a toddler learns. Look at how a toddler learns to walk. We don't say, now, stand up. Yeah, now you're getting your balance now. See your left foot, move that forward. Now you can feel your weight. No, they just watch what goes on and think, oh, that person can do this thing on there. I want to try that, right? It's all exploratory. It's all inquiry based. It's all try and fail, try and fail, try and fail, try and fail, trial. Oh, I took a few steps, right? Oh, I can't be bothered doing any more today. I'll go and crawl again. Look at those principles at either end of the spectrum, and then, well, we need to somehow infuse that into the school age years. But we kind of traditionally, it's all exploratory here. Oh, it's school age now. Bang, we're going to do this different thing and stick them on the production line. And then, because I remember I'd come out of, I think I was in my second year of teaching, and I could feel my brain starting to release and go, I think I'm learning now on my own terms. I'm not just about how to teach, but I knew that it's the first time I thought, it was a sense of agency I had over my life. And it's the first time I'd ever had it. And anyway, a little random thought. But so I think it's the way humans learn. Like, what works for me? And
Yeah.
we all like to be empowered in the way we go about things.
Well, here's something I wanted to say, and I wouldn't. I mean, you just said it. That I'm very into the research and I'm
Yeah,
into the reading,
good on
and
you.
maybe more
Fantastic.
sort of into the practice side and intuition. I do feel that education is such a high stakes game. The outcomes are so important for children, and that process begins with the very early years education, and it's a very exciting time and it's a very important time. But I do feel there is a level of accountability to just double check and fact check ourselves and make sure we're on the right pathway.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But the problem is so much of the learning is so inaccessible. It's in PhD journals, and educators are very busy. And so partly what I'm trying to do with Simplexity is to bring things down, to be able to cite everything, anything that I say.
Yeah,
I can cite it to a journal or a reference this or that, so I'm not making it up.
yeah, yeah.
But to act in that way for educators, because what educators do, and this is the magic, or what they should be able to do, is develop something that aligns with the principles and sciences of learning, but they use their craft and their art and their creativity
Yeah.
to bring that alive with students and manage all those different complex variables. This is why it's so important that people understand the principles, and then you give them the freedom to create and make in their classrooms, and then that gives them that meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
I think the problem is in education is when teachers are their hands are tied so much, and it's drill and kill, and it's teach from through the chapter, what chapter one, chapter two, chapter three, and there's no license to create and make, and then that's a suffocating industry then, and particularly if it's over measured and over monitored.
Yeah.
So I feel what you say is really important, but as long as it's guided by a framework of understanding
Yeah.
and principles.
And I should, for anyone who's listening to this, I should also qualify that we aren't really doing similar things in our consultancy, right? So you're going in with this information and present it to schools and guiding them in that way. Whereas I'm going into schools who have got programs in place and saying, let's maximize the conversion of your ideas into practice.
Right.
So, and then if there's an opportunity for me to, if I'm an expert in a certain field, I'll ask the leaders, say, look, I could write this little thing and put something together with your permission, but I'll put it out there and you can have a look and, and we can edit it if
Yeah.
you'd like me to, right? And I'll do that. But I'm not coming in as Edsplorer is, right? So that's sort of, it's a relief, to be honest, because I'm now just working with
Yeah.
institutions to help them underpin their training to maximize that success. So
Yeah.
anyway,
I think the goal is the same though. At the end of the day,
yeah, yeah,
it's empowering and equipping
yeah,
or facilitating, I like your word there, learning as best we can to support the learning and holistic development of children,
yeah,
and also, but the educators too. And often, sometimes educators are almost ignored in this equation. Professional learning and professional growth is just ultra important for children. I mean, the effect size of a great teacher who's on top of their game for a child is enormous.
yeah,
John Hattie's research,
yeah.
it's a hugely influential factor. And so I think we're both on the same end, we're
But
doing
you know what?
similar things, but from the other end of the spectrum.
Yes, I agree. Everything needs to be research backed, but that doesn't mean that you spend half your PD talking about the research. Like, do the snippets and say, look, here it is, access it, please. But like, this is just to show that I know what I'm talking about. But it needs to be two things. Teachers need to be taken on an awareness shift journey, right? Which means they need a lot of self-reflection. And there needs to be lots of nuggets like you gave before, which was that say it, teach it thing. Like lots of simple ideas that people who are scared, and let's face it, a lot of teachers are scared to shift from their default approach into something that's more facilitatory, right? It's a challenging journey to take, but it's so friggin' addictive and it's so
Mm.
beautiful once you start getting it right. But they need guidance, right? And I think one mistake that professional development providers often make is that they talk about the theory and they talk about these activity, they show some activities, hopefully, but they haven't talked about the transition. How does someone go from here to there? And I made this mistake in my early professional
Mm.
development days because it took me a decade to shift. And then I'm just showing these teachers these great activities, not realizing, well, they're going to try and tackle that with their current mindset about how to go about it. And it's not going to work. And they're going to say, well, there you go, Rich, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So all that needs to happen, and that takes time. And there needs to be lots of implementations and
Yeah.
reflecting and all that sort of stuff. So that's
I
another.
agree. It's totally a longitudinal
It is.
journey with colleagues, with peers as much as possible. I think just to relate back to what you said, there needs to be a mandate, for this from leadership where they say, we want you to be innovative. We want you to be creative. We want you to try different things. We want you to share those strategies
Yes.
with your colleagues. One of my former colleagues, she was in charge of professional learning,
Mm.
so she was an agent for that in the school and facilitating. She developed this concept called PD for us, by us.
Yeah,
And it
right.
was a wonderful idea because the whole idea was you've got these explorers, these teachers, trying things out, doing action-based research. You can form your professional learning communities, collaborate, and appreciate and share in a very positive, non-threatening way. And one of my Edsplorers, fellow Edsplorers, Kevin Bartlett, hugely quotable guy. And learning and teaching is what happens when you're not watching as a leader. It's what should be happening because you trust your teachers to be genuinely doing the best for children at all times and all children. And so, how do we get to that place? Well, you nurture that by setting up those collaborative communities with purpose and with goals where you're facilitating the growth of those teachers all the time by sharing little strategies, by having them observe their peers,
Mm.
by people doing share outs
Mm.
or PD for us days where people can choose what they're interested in. And
Mm.
so it's developing this whole culture around learning. And that does align so well with the learning sciences because you've got agency, you've
Yep.
got choice, you've got voice, you've got support, you've got collaboration, all of these things welded into that culture. But it requires a mandate from the leadership
Yeah.
to believe in it and to license it and say, let's do it, guys, and let's celebrate this and
And
work in
the,
this way.
the leaders need to be actively involved, I think, in the program, not just, yes, okay, we'll do that. And then they don't actually even know what's going on. Like
Mm.
they need to somehow not be there the whole time necessarily, but they need
Yeah.
to have a stake in the ground for
I
change.
agree. And in many ways, they're advocating, they're endorsing,
And any good
they're
leader will want that anyway.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I there's different types of leadership when we talk about transformative or transactional. And I think, this is pedagogical leadership
Yeah.
that's potentially very transformative, where you don't always have to be the expert in the room. Often you won't be as a leader. Often you're going to be
Yeah.
completely outgunned by people who know a lot more about you. I mean, I remember as a principal going into the science lab to watch several extraordinary teachers do working their magic with a group of children, fully engaged and absorbing. And I don't think I can teach them much. My subject I was an English, major. But what you can see is engagement, you can see challenge, you can see student voice, you can see student choice, you can see the design of the classroom and the setup. That's a lot. But at the end of the day, if I knew as a principal that my teachers are working together, sharing, visualizing learning, discussing it, giving great nuggets and strategies, I was like, I don't need to worry. I don't need to measure this. I don't need to monitor this
Yeah.
because they built that culture of collaboration and they're working on it together as serious professionals.
Mm.
And that's really that cellular way of working would bring a lot of benefit in a lot of schools.
I totally agree. Question for you. If we're talking about professional development and ongoing learning for teachers, collaborative, whatever, what makes it stick? What makes the learning stick?
Yeah, it's such a great question, isn't it? And I remember reading fairly recently an article which was in Edutopia,
Right.
which I think is a lovely resource. I
Yes.
think George Lucas Foundation backed resource, and they specified 6 areas that teachers, the actual people, the recipients, if you like, themselves had said made a great, powerful learning experience. I've noted them down because I'm not sure I'd commit them accurately to memory, but
Yep.
perceived relevance,
Right.
the learning
So hang on.
is
So are we looking at this through professional development or, I mean,
absolutely, yeah,
obviously
professional
it also
development.
applies to the
So
classroom, but we're looking through the lens of professional development. Right. It's got to be,
absolutely.
it
So
has to be
this is
perceived. I mean, it might be relevant, but it needs to be
mm,
perceived by the teachers as relevant.
absolutely. So
Big difference.
perception from the teacher, so how it's framed, angled, connected as being valuable and beneficial to
Mhm.
them is hugely important.
Yep.
So you can imagine a situation where it's like top-down initiative, latest fad, or something where they can imagine themselves being involved that will help them grow to mastery, that will make a
Right.
difference to children's lives. Those are two very different things. So perceived relevance is important. The second one is timeliness, timely, that it's
Yep.
timely. So relates to their perceived priorities as well and their needs as educators.
Mhm.
Is this something that might be valuable to me in the next few months that
Yes.
I can use? Will help me with this assessment or
Yep.
with that task or with that unit.
Yep.
So that timeliness, I think, is a great concept. The other one is more to do with teachers' lives and how busy they are and how much they've got on, which is flexibility. So
Right.
the ability to make that learning work maybe asynchronously or
Yep.
when it fits them, when they're in their thrive hour, when they're really on it and when they can.
Yep.
And that speaks to really hybrid learning environments
Yep.
really, really nicely, I think. And I know that's something you
I like
specialize
that.
in. You get that one for free. No, that's Edutopia. And another one is that it's social.
Yes.
It's social and again, it's cooperative learning, collaborative learning that
Yep.
you're learning with your peers. And we were talking about that a lot,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, and how to share and access knowledge. Particularly, a lot of knowledge is often very siloed. A lot of learning can be very
Yep.
siloed in a module, in a course, but how can they work together,
Mm.
share, celebrate, tap each other for information, share ideas, strategies, golden nuggets?
Again, say it, teach it. That should work in a teacher professional development context as well.
Yeah, I think it's just such a
Or in other words,
powerful truth. Yeah. And a lot of these are transferable strategies. Julie Ryan, who oversees a PTC course, Principals Training course I did, she was one of the facilitators, and she talks about triple track strategies, things that you could work or use in many different environments with different stakeholders.
yeah.
And a lot of these are the same
Mm.
because our brains are, very similar. I mean, yeah, sure, a younger child and an adult is going to have differences, prefrontal cortex and stuff, they're not mature yet, but a lot of things are the same. And then other one, which I thought, was really nice having social was personalized. And
Yes.
this is what you were saying earlier. In other words, Richard, we're talking about choice, voice,
Yeah.
agency.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like trinity of
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
ideas. Where teachers can do that and it increases that sense of relevance
Yep.
and something that they can use and take away that will help them tomorrow or next week.
Yep.
That person and that might include also the way they learn as well, how it's introduced to them and what mediums and things. And the final one I think was multimodal. Multimodal could be the medium,
Cool.
variety of mediums. So again, it could be using in person,
Yeah. Yeah.
online, collaborative
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, ways of
Yeah.
interacting with that
Cool.
information. And again, that speaks to
I should know that.
hybrid blended learning. That's what you do. But hybrid and blended learning
Yeah. Yeah.
being most powerful, particularly if it's longitudinal and it's over time and you're returning to it and you're coming back. And that's the beauty and the win-win of using platforms now,
Yeah.
is that you can continue your learning journey. It's not just a one-stop shop, with a single workshop and it's all forgotten about. You've got knowledge decay. but where you are able to return to it and use it over and over again. So I'm leaning heavily on that Edutopia
Mm.
article. There's probably a few more things. So I don't know how you feel about it.
Oh, I think that's brilliant. And that's what's fueled me. Look, if anyone wants to talk about learning platforms, there's probably not many people more experienced than I am because I've 15 years, 10,000 hours, multiple platforms. And the thing is, and I don't want to be criticizing platforms, but most of them are designed for that information delivery, right? And then we'll tack on a quiz widget and we'll tack on a little comment widget. And it's really difficult to understand why that's not going to work compared to a system that is designed from the ground up for interaction, for engagement, for back and forth, for this personalized, multimodal, social learning type setup, right? And I only know, I'm not going to mention it, but I only know I've only come across two platforms in my entire career that are designed for that. Yeah,
I'll
it's
just add one bit to that. So you create this experience together over time,
yeah,
and
yeah.
the assumption is that people need time to go away, try something out, try away, and go away and experiment, and then come back because it's that practice. Practice makes cortex. Practice makes
Yes.
that that's a neuroplasticity principle, and that's how we get better at things. It's practice, and the teachers need time to go away, practice, and then come back, reflect on it,
Yeah.
exchange and share information to then deepen that learning and go back to those schemas that
And
we're trying to create.
and so my other soapbox will be that a lot of organizations are doing that. But, and again, it's not a criticism of what they're doing. It's just that if it's only done in a live setting, if it's only done through talking, then it's very difficult for that system to engender accountability in all the teachers and to actually have change occur. It's
Yeah.
nobody's fault. It's just that that framework doesn't maximize the conversion of ideas into practice. And so all
Yeah.
I do is to say, don't change anything, but let me underpin what you're doing long term. And we're talking 3 years minimum, and it should go on for almost ever. There's an expectation that they're going to implement ideas from the training, and there might be PLC groups that they're researching stuff, but there's no reason why the occasional half-day one-off seminar can't be injected. So they do that, and you have some notes, but then you say to all teachers, right, we want you all to implement one thing from this half-day seminar. Don't care what it is, but implement one thing. And then we get them to write it up. So that there's the many little write-ups, call them online tutorials, call them what you like. And they're all tagged for searching purposes. So, hey, I want something on year 5 with reading. Bang, there's 20 things I can choose from. I'm going to do that. And then I go
Yeah, I
away.
love
And
it.
then, so the teachers are reflecting. Yes, they can still reflect verbally, but they're reflecting online. So then everyone benefits from that because there's value in reading other people's reflections. And you're also
Mm.
reading other people's write-ups of their favorite little strategies. It could be just an in other words thing. I mean, that's just a tiny thing that someone could look at and go, oh my gosh, I hadn't thought of that. I'm going to use that, right? So
Yeah.
everyone benefits. So that ticks the relevance box, the timeliness, because I could do this tomorrow or in a month's time or when I'm ready, and it might be in 3 years' time when I've made that shift. And I'm looking and, geez, I read that 2 years ago and it didn't make sense, but now I get it. It's flexible. It's social learning because they're still doing the in-person stuff. It's personalized because there's
Mm.
choice and it's multimodal. So, it's
Bing, bing, it rings all of
yeah,
those bells. And do you know what as well? And I don't know if you're familiar with this concept, but there's something called nudge theory.
nudge theory.
Nudge
Love it.
theory. So it's used in economics, and it's by Richard Thaler,
Okay.
and I think it's Cal Silverstein, and they're economists. They won the Nobel Prize for this, and essentially, it's how do you incentivize human behavior?
Yeah.
This is what economists are very interested in. And so, what are the environmental things that you can do to nudge people along in a certain direction?
Wow.
And they use a little acronym called, I think it's EAST. And first of all, make it easy.
Yeah, yeah.
Make it easy. so it's not too much stressful because a lot of, sometimes a lot of platforms are complex
Yeah,
behind
yeah, yeah.
3 passwords. You've got to drill down to find this. The more easy it is to find and share and reflect, the less cumbersome it is,
Well,
the more people are likely to do it.
it's interesting because the one school I'm working with, they said, "Oh, we used to have this stuff on SharePoint. No one ever went there, but this is like
Yeah.
social media, and it's not.
Yeah.
But I get what Fiona was saying, and people are into it because it's easy. Yeah, go on. What's the next one?
The
A.
second one is accessible and it's connected to the
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
concept.
yeah,
But
yeah.
and I think it has implications, not just understanding something,
Yeah,
simplifying it to,
that's the third one.
but
Simplify.
also easy to get to, again, not far away. And is that, 1, 2 click principle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, and I think accessible through language, concepts, simplicity, the way of
On the
thinking.
language thing, I've just connected with a guy in Sydney who's developing a platform where imagine this: you got a YouTube video, but it's not on YouTube, and I'm speaking in English, and you're watching it, and you go, "No, I want it in German," and you just press the German
Yeah.
flag, and
Brilliant.
it's the subtitles are in German, and my voice is in German, and then
Yeah.
oh no, I'm
It's
sick of that
incredible. Yeah.
French. No, actually, I
Yeah.
want Mandarin, and
Yeah.
like
It's
26
amazing.
languages. Anyway, go on.
It's phenomenal.
We were on
Accessible was the second one. The third one was social.
social.
Again, so you make it social because people like to work together. Well,
Yeah, yeah,
depends
yeah.
who it is, but but generally speaking, we tend to be mostly
Are you
collaborative and
suggesting that the four straight rows of desks is, are we putting that out the window? You are, okay. Yep. And
you, you
what's the
just got to
T?
compress them and put them together. Have a nice U shape in your classroom or something, and then same again, timely.
Timely, yeah.
Timely. So again, it's research that's being triangulated. This one's
Yeah,
coming
yeah,
in
yeah.
from the economists, which are just great ways of nudging us along as human beings and incentivizing us to work together in towards a given goal. And I think these frameworks are really useful
They
in
are.
understanding people. Uh,
But
so
but
that,
again,
there's my two
no, this is
cents.
good. And look, I love the fact that you're like an encyclopedia of references. But my my argument is, and this is not in any way to diminish what you're saying, but my throw any good idea at me like you have today, and I'll say they're all common sense once you understand them.
Yeah.
And it's like, these things where you say something and go, I hadn't thought of doing that. And it's just so obvious now because it's obvious. You can see it. You
Yeah.
can see it
But
in I do it in the
you know what I'm
classroom and it's
thinking?
so
Yeah.
obvious. The kids' lights, eyes are lighting
Yeah.
up. The
It's interesting, isn't it? It's so
behavior issues
obvious.
have gone.
Yeah.
They're eating out of my hands. It's just obvious. And it's not about telling jokes and whatever. It's all about doing the work.
But I wonder if there's a connection, just to be philosophical and ontological, if there is a connection between wisdom and
Oh
common
yeah.
sense. Wisdom coming from living and
Totally.
experience and exposure
Yeah,
to
yeah.
seeing things done in different ways.
We sort of, I think we
And
got into this a little bit with David and David Adley and Barry Cooper, and we're talking about experience and how common sense changes over time as you get older and more
uh,
experience. So, what's
is
common
it
sense?
common? Is it common anymore, or is it the fact that your domain knowledge has increased so much
Yeah,
that you've actually gained wisdom,
yeah.
and with that comes a sense of humility as well,
There's a
because
whole
you've
other chat.
realized how complex things are.
Yeah, that's true. Because I know, see, a lot of the stuff, like if I was listening to this as a first year teacher, I'd go, well, this is kind of interesting, but I, I'm just trying to get through my
I want
lesson
to
plan.
survive.
Yeah, it is survival.
It's easy to forget those, those challenges of those first years
Yeah,
that, we worked in education and in a city schools, roll up your sleeves, get stuck in, and sometimes without much support at all, and you're
yeah.
expected to swim. And I think I have huge empathy for teachers, and it is truly a noble profession. We need humans more than ever. So I think any strategies of support to help young teachers and new teachers are really good. And professional learning starts right at the beginning of our careers, and it should continue right until the end, and
Exactly.
arguably never stop.
So look, Leo, we need to wind this up. We could be doing this for hours otherwise, and it's getting late for me.
I'm really happy to have a little bit of time with you, Richard, just
Oh,
to
look, it's been an absolute
brew
pleasure.
and
And
chew the fat on learning.
I'm going to be listening to this as I edit it and taking notes. And there's a lot of notes to take because I loved all your anecdotes and the references. Yeah, thanks for that. And I know it's not the last chat we're going to have. So thanks a million. That was great.
Pleasure. And well, it's I think 10 o'clock at night for you, so you probably need to go and get some sleep now. But I've got a whole day of work ahead of me. So
You have
a pleasure,
indeed.
Richard.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay.